Well, President Donald Trump says the U.S. is reinstating a naval blockade on Iran and would be reimbursed 20% on all cargo shipped through the Strait of Hormuz. This after Tehran claimed it had closed the vital waterway, saying it would not allow Washington to intervene. The U.S. also intensified its strikes on Iran this Monday, following an intense exchange of fire between the two sides over the weekend. Morgan Eyre has the latest for us.
Iran and the US continue to launch strikes at each other as they wrestle for control over the Strait of Hormuz, with US President Trump now claiming they are the guardians of the vital waterway. Trump said that Iranian ships will no longer be able to travel through the strait, but other countries will have fair and open use. In return, they will charge a fee of 20% on all cargo shipped. Until now, the US said the waterway should remain open without tolls, which international law generally forbids.
Will become the guardian of the strait. Maybe we'll call it the guardian angel of the strait. And we should be reimbursed for that. We're going to get paid for guarding it, a lot of money. But we just want to be reimbursed for doing all of this, for putting our people in danger. But we're really not putting people, we're really saving people.
The American military has tried to establish a route through the strait along the coast of Oman that would be outside of Iranian control. Iran has attacked ships using that route, saying the US is violating the interim peace deal. The US carried out its latest strikes on an Iranian submarine and a ship maintenance facility to degrade their capacity to target commercial shipping. Tehran hit back at any US attempt to take over the strait, asserting its right to manage traffic.
We do not and will not allow the United States, under any circumstances, to interfere in the management of the Strait of Hormuz. The armed forces of the Islamic Republic of Iran will respond forcefully to any disruption or insecurity caused to the passage of commercial and oil tanker vessels by the US aggressor and its pirate forces when it operates outside Iran's designated route and without authorization from the armed forces.
The EU called for the strait to be open as it was before the war, and the UN's shipping agency remained opposed to any attempts to charge for passage.
Well, let's get some analysis on the story now, and for that we can bring in Aaron David Miller. He's a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and the former State Department Middle East Analyst. Aaron, great to have you with us on the program today. Let's begin with the comments by Donald Trump today. So he's announced yet another naval blockade. He also said the US would become the guardian of the Strait of Hormuz. But just how realistic are the US president's threats? Is the US really in a position to exert control of the strait, or does the leverage lie more with Tehran?
You know, on the broader question, I think the administration has three options. Number one is to reimpose, and it will be reimposed tomorrow. It requires a 24-hour notice for shipping companies to impose a naval blockade and then try to use military power to degrade Iran's capacity to leverage the straits. That's option number one. Second is literally to acquiesce in Iran's newfound leverage. They've weaponized geography and accept the reality that the straits are not going back to the way they were, free and unfettered, February 27, 28. And then the third option is to direct the U.S. military to mount a major campaign, which would require several hundred U.S. aircraft, probably a limited deployment of ground forces, a fair number of cruisers, destroyers, and frigates, and probably two carrier strike groups to literally open the straits. The problem with that option is that you have to make sure that they remained open. And that is a very complicated set of objectives and could be easily defeated by Iran's drone and missile strikes on shipping. So I think the U.S. has three unpalatable options. If I had to guess, I think they'll try option one in an effort to change Iran's calculations and its newfound leverage over the straits. I don't think they're going to succeed.
So Iran, for its part, has insisted that it wants to ensure the safe passage of ships through the strait. It's, of course, accused the U.S. of obstructing this effort. But from Tehran's point of view, do they see it in their interest to drag this on, so to speak, because they know that time is not on Donald Trump's side?
Well, that's the key question, isn't it? Is time an ally or an adversary? And that gets to the question of whose pain threshold is higher, Iran's or Donald Trump's. At this point, frankly, I can't answer that question. But what I can say is that the Iranians are prepared to want to create a new strategic reality. They want to turn the Straits literally into a cash cow, an ATM machine. And estimates indicate that, moderate estimates indicate that imposing tolls, navigation fees, service fees, fees for environmental protection, so to speak, could reap $40 billion a year for them. Plus, they have leverage now, newfound leverage over the Gulf states. So I think this is the core issue, and I think it reflects, frankly, the absurdity of this entire enterprise. This war was based on the logic of essentially preventing Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon. They now have found a new nuclear weapon. It's weaponizing geography and controlling and leveraging the Straits of Hormuz. I think that is their new card. And it will take an enormous American effort, even at that, to try to pry them loose from this.
Now, we saw an exchange of fire between the US and Iran throughout the weekend, and they continued through today. Are we to assume the ceasefire is effectively over? Are we returning to full-scale hostilities?
Whether it's full-scale or not remains to be seen, but I think we're in an escalatory cycle. It could well be if the administration decides to enlarge the target set and go after civilian infrastructure. Over the last 4 days, I think they destroyed a couple railway bridges on the assumption that they were transit points for Iran transporting weapons to strategic points. But if the president makes good on what he's threatened, basically they go after power plants, electricity grids, bridges, dams, civilian infrastructure in an effort to somehow, horrific as it may sound, to make Iran dark and thirsty. Then I think the Iranian response is going to be incredibly intense, most likely at American military bases and targeting Gulf energy and civilian infrastructure. So too early to say whether we're going back to February 28th, but it's quite clear that what we're witnessing now is the new normal. And the only way this is going to change is if both sides realize that they are in what you can describe as a herding stalemate. That is to say that the price of continuing this conflict is getting too prohibitive to bear. It is at that point that parties begin to buy the time and space for an actual negotiation. But I don't think, frankly, we're anywhere near that point. And if they do return to the negotiating table, it's far from certain that the gaps on the core issue can be bridged.
Aaron, now, Iran's military said today that the risk of regional war has increased after the US strikes. Let's zoom out for a second because, of course, Israel is in the picture as well. And Iran has said Israel's hostilities in Lebanon must stop in order to arrive at some sort of a peace agreement. Now, could Israel then derail this framework agreement that's in place with its continued strikes on Lebanon?
I mean, I think that the administration will try to confine this to a U.S.-Iranian conflict. You don't want a regional war. The Iranians, frankly, their interests are better served by not involving the Israelis right now. As far as Lebanon is concerned, I think the Trump administration has laid down some red lines which so far have held. That is to say, no strikes on the Dahia and the southern suburbs, or let alone farther north. But the Israelis will continue to maintain their military presence in southern Lebanon. So that is a potential trigger point if, in fact, this does escalate into something that you and I would describe as a regional confrontation. Look, it's serious enough, given the fact that the U.S. and Iran are at the lower end of an escalatory cycle, which could get out of control. And if Americans are killed, which is another red line that the president has identified, if Americans are killed in these attacks, or if the Iranians decide to go after a U.S. embassy, for example, in Europe, or there are credible reports, as recently as 2024, of plans by IRGC elements to kill President Trump. I mean, I don't think the Iranians have the capacity, but those reports have to be taken seriously. If that occurs, an attack on American soil, then I think you're looking at an escalation that goes far beyond anything that we've seen.
All right, Aaron, we're going to have to leave it there as we're out of time, but really great to have your insight today. Thank you so much for your time.